Reference checks gives too much power to former employers over former employees. It gives former employers the power to retaliate and limit opportunities for former employees, which is fundamentally unfair. You might have left your job because it was toxic, it was low pay, you were being bullied, or none of those things. Maybe you just outgrew the place. But because of the unwritten rules of corporate, you're not allowed to say these type of things on a job interview because it's considered to be speaking badly about your former employer or speaking in poor taste. So essentially, you have to dress it up and lie. You have to be creative as to why you left, and your creativity must lean toward positivity, or you'll be judged. Now, the catch-22 is because you're not telling the full truth about why you left, because it's frowned upon if you do, if it happens to be negative, you have to give this former employer as a reference. The truth is, your prospective employer can call your former employer for the reference, and your former employer can go by the book and do everything right. Or they can have that off-the-record conversation, depending on who they're talking to. And that could be catastrophic if the person they end up talking to doesn't like you. And of course, someone watching this video will go in the comments and point out that the off-the-record conversations and references are illegal. And yes, they are. I totally agree with you. However, can you prove it? Can you prove that it happened? Can you prove that's the reason why you didn't get the job? Probably not. The second reason is reference checks don't guarantee or predict good performance. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results, especially from other corporations. Let's face it, each business does business differently. There's no one size fits all. Reference checks can offer a great perception or a bad perception of a former employee. But as we know, perception isn't always reality. They never paint a complete picture, and there are many factors that determines how an employee shows up to work. Was the employee set up for success? Did they have the support that they needed? Was the environment psychologically safe? Those are just a few things to consider. Those type of factors are never considered. Also, studies show that reference checks are poor predictors of great future performance. For the reference check to be truly effective, the prospective employer would need so much more information to paint a complete picture. And they just don't have time for that. Also, there are so many legal hurdles they would have to get over to get that type of information. And the third reason is references are not objective. If the reference check is legally completed, your previous employer should only be verifying dates of employment and if you're eligible for rehire. Typically, verifying your dates of employment is not a problem. It's when your former employer says you're no longer eligible for rehire. Then that raises a lot of questions in judgment and misplaced judgment in many instances. Why? Because it circles back to my first point. This unwritten rule of you cannot be honest and you cannot talk negatively, or you're not supposed to talk negatively about your former employer on the interview. If you have negative experiences, you're supposed to keep that to yourself, and you're supposed to wrap it up in a bow and act like everything was fine and you just needed room for growth, so you're moving on. When now the prospective employer has a decision to make based on the information and feedback that they received from the former employer. And do they tell you that they decided to move on with another candidate, or do they dig in and say, hey, this is the feedback we got, this is what happened? Probably not. They'll probably just move on to the next candidate. And then you probably lose an opportunity. Here's the thing. A good hiring process should help prospective employers determine if the candidate is a good fit. After all, they're asking for 4, 5, and 6 rounds of interviews. If they can't get the information that they need in all of those rounds, that says something about their hiring process. They should not be depending heavily or validating external feedback, because that was in another place of employment, around a different set of people, around different teams with different managers, at play, and you just don't know the dynamics of the other workplace outside of the brief information that they received during their reference check. The bottom line is, if the candidate is skilled and they meet the criteria and the requirements for the position that they are interviewing for, they should be given a shot.